For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of July 18, 2015, for friends, 24-year-old Madison Reed, 23-year-old Catherine Blair, 25-year-old Xavier Boone, and 24-year-old Sean Harvey set out from their campsite deep in the Adirondack Mountains of New York on a canoe trip. They never returned. Despite an extensive search by local authorities and volunteers, the four vanished without a trace, their abandoned campsite offering no clues to their fate. For 8 agonizing years, their families lived with the unbearable weight of uncertainty, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Then, in the spring of 2023, 2 anglers fishing a remote stretch of shoreline made a chilling discovery. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. Madison Reed, a vibrant 24-year-old with an infectious laugh, was the organizer. Catherine Blair, 23, brought a quiet strength and meticulous planning to every adventure. Xavier Boone, 25, the group's comedian, always had a joke ready, even in the face of adversity. Sean Harvey, also 24, was the steady hand, the experienced paddler who ensured everyone felt safe and confident. These 4 friends, bound by a shared love for the outdoors, were inseparable. Their passion for wilderness paddling had taken them on countless trips, but their planned excursion into the heart of the Adirondack Mountains in September 2015 would be their last. They had meticulously charted a route through the pristine lakes and winding waterways, a challenging but familiar journey for seasoned paddlers like themselves. Their itinerary detailed planned campsites, estimated paddling times, and emergency contacts. They packed their canoe with supplies, lightweight tents, sleeping bags, cooking gear, and enough provisions for their week-long trip. On a crisp autumn morning, under a sky the color of gunmetal gray, they launched their canoe from a public access point near Saranac Lake. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. They paddled with practiced ease, their laughter echoing across the still water. They set up camp on a secluded island, a picture-perfect spot nestled amidst towering pines. The first day unfolded as planned, full of the simple joys of wilderness life. They fished, swam, and shared stories around a crackling campfire under a blanket of stars. Then, silence. Days later, when they failed to return as scheduled, concern rippled through their network of friends and family. Calls went unanswered. Worried messages received no replies. The alarm was raised. Park rangers discovered their campsite undisturbed. The tent remained pitched, supplies neatly organized, and personal belongings untouched. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of what might have happened. A chilling sense of mystery settled over the scene. The initial search efforts were extensive. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning the dense forest canopy and the vast expanse of water. Ground teams combed the rugged terrain, navigating treacherous trails and dense undergrowth. Divers plunged into the depths of the lakes, searching for any trace of the missing canoe. The sheer size and unforgiving nature of the Adirondacks made the search a daunting task. Every passing hour brought diminishing hope. Madison's mother, Sarah Reed, recalled the agonizing wait, the slow creep of fear that gnawed at her insides. Every phone call, every knock on the door, I thought it would be them, saying they were okay, she said, her voice trembling. Xavier's father, David Boone, echoed the sentiment. We held on to hope for so long, he said, his eyes welling with tears. We just wanted to know what happened. The families clung to the belief that their loved ones were somehow still alive, lost but surviving somewhere in the vast wilderness. But as days turned into weeks, the grim reality began to set in. The search continued, but the initial urgency faded, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty that would haunt them for years. The initial investigation into the disappearance of Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean was hampered by the lack of concrete evidence. Park rangers, the first responders on the scene, meticulously documented the abandoned campsite. They photographed the untouched supplies, the neatly folded sleeping bags, and the remnants of the previous night's campfire. Every detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was recorded. Local law enforcement joined the effort, conducting interviews with anyone who might have seen the group before their disappearance. They spoke to employees at the launch point, other campers in the area, and residents of nearby towns. Every lead, every potential witness, was pursued. Initial theories abounded. Accidental drowning was a possibility, given the challenging waterways of the Adirondacks. Perhaps their canoe had capsized in rough waters, or they had been swept away by unexpected currents. Getting lost was another plausible scenario. The vast wilderness could easily disorient even experienced hikers and paddlers. Wild animal attacks, though rare, couldn't be ruled out. The Adirondacks are home to black bears, and while attacks are infrequent, the possibility remained. The lack of any signs of struggle at the campsite, however, cast doubt on this theory. Investigators pored over maps of the area, studying the campers' planned route and searching for any clues that might shed light on their fate. They consulted with experienced wilderness guides, hoping to gain insights into the potential dangers and challenges the group might have encountered. Despite their best efforts, the investigation yielded little in the way of concrete answers. The vastness of the search area, coupled with the lack of witnesses and physical evidence, made the task incredibly challenging. The growing frustration was palpable among both investigators and the families of the missing campers. As the days stretched into weeks, the media descended upon the small Adirondack communities. The story of the 4 missing friends captivated the nation. News outlets broadcast updates on the search efforts, interviewing family members and law enforcement officials. The case became a national obsession, with speculation and theories running rampant online. Among those interviewed was Natalie Stanton, Madison's cousin. She recalled seeing a group of unfamiliar men near the launch point on the morning the campers set out. They seemed out of place, she said, their demeanor unsettling. She described their vehicle as a nondescript, dark-colored SUV. At the time, her observation was dismissed as inconsequential, a detail lost in the overwhelming flood of information. Little did anyone know that this seemingly insignificant piece of information would eventually become a crucial piece of the puzzle, leading investigators down a path they never could have anticipated. The relentless search for Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean gradually scaled back as weeks turned into months, and months into years. The initial flurry of activity, the helicopters, the ground teams, the divers, faded, replaced by a quiet resignation. The challenging terrain of the Adirondacks, with its dense forests, treacherous waterways, and vast, uninhabited areas, had swallowed them whole. The sheer scale of the wilderness made a comprehensive search virtually impossible. Leads dried up. Tips dwindled. The case, once a national headline, slipped from the public's attention. Lead investigator Sergeant John Riley, a veteran of the New York State Police with decades of experience, spoke of the frustrating reality of searching such a vast and remote area. You could be standing just yards away from something crucial and never know it, he explained. The wilderness can keep its secrets. He described the meticulous grid searches conducted by teams of trained professionals, the countless hours spent poring over aerial photographs, and the sophisticated sonar technology used to scan the depths of the lakes. Despite their best efforts, the unforgiving landscape yielded nothing. The families, meanwhile, endured a slow, agonizing descent into a world of unanswered questions and perpetual grief. The initial shock and disbelief gave way to a numbing sense of loss, compounded by the lack of closure. Sarah Reed, Madison's mother, spoke of the constant reminders of her daughter's absence. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, it's a fresh wave of grief, she said, her voice choked with emotion. We're left with a gaping hole in our lives, a void that can never be filled. David Boone, Xavier's father, shared the same sentiment. The not knowing is the hardest part, he explained. We need answers. We need to know what happened to our children. The media, which had initially descended upon the Adirondacks in droves, gradually lost interest as the case grew cold. The headlines faded. The news crews packed up and moved on to other stories. The families were left to grapple with their grief in the quiet solitude of their homes, their questions unanswered, their hopes dwindling. The case files, thick with reports, interviews, and photographs, were archived, gathering dust on a shelf in a dimly lit office. The disappearance of Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean became another cold case, a tragic mystery lost to the vastness of the Adirondack wilderness. For 8 long years, the silence remained unbroken. 8 years of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights, of a gnawing emptiness that refused to be filled. The families, though resigned to the possibility that they might never know the truth, never gave up hope. They clung to the belief that someday, somehow, the wilderness would relinquish its secrets. 8 years had passed since the disappearance of Madison Reed, Catherine Blair, Xavier Boone, and Sean Harvey. The case had long since grown cold, relegated to the archives of unsolved mysteries. The families, though still grieving, had begun to accept the agonizing possibility that they might never know what happened to their loved ones. Then, on a blustery afternoon in May 2023, a chance discovery rekindled the embers of hope and dread. 2 local anglers, Dale Higgins and Mark Olson, were fishing on a remote stretch of shoreline along Lake Lila, miles from the campers' last known location. They were casting their lines near a cluster of wind-battered pines when something caught Higgins' eye. A dark shape, partially submerged in the shallows, bobbed gently in the waves. As they approached, the object became clearer. It was an overturned canoe, its hull scarred and weathered, its once vibrant colors faded by years of exposure to the elements. Higgins and Olson cautiously pulled the canoe ashore. The vessel was heavy, suggesting it contained something more than just waterlogged debris. As they carefully turned it over, a wave of unease washed over them. Tangled amidst the fishing lines and tattered life vests were several plastic zip ties and rolls of duct tape. The items seemed strangely out of place, incongruous with the typical gear carried by recreational paddlers. Then, lodged beneath a seat cushion, Higgins discovered a wallet. He cautiously opened it, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, he found a driver's license and several credit cards bearing the name Miles McCarthy. The anglers, sensing the potential significance of their discovery, immediately contacted the authorities. News of the find spread quickly through the small Adirondack communities, reigniting the long-dormant investigation into the disappearance of the 4 campers. The overturned canoe, the zip ties, the duct tape, and the wallet belonging to Miles McCarthy. These seemingly disparate pieces of evidence suddenly converged, hinting at a sinister turn of events that no one could have foreseen. The canoe itself became a focal point of the renewed investigation. Forensic experts meticulously examined the vessel, searching for any trace evidence that might shed light on its journey over the past 8 years. They analyzed the scratches and dents on the hull, looking for patterns that might indicate how it came to be overturned and abandoned in such a remote location. The zip ties and duct tape were carefully collected and sent to a crime lab for analysis. Experts examined the materials, hoping to determine their age and origin, and to ascertain whether they could be linked to the missing campers. The discovery of Miles McCarthy's wallet was a significant breakthrough. Investigators ran his name through their databases, searching for any criminal record or connections to the Adirondack region. The results of the search would soon lead them down a dark and unexpected path, revealing a hidden world of extremism and violence lurking beneath the tranquil surface of the wilderness. For the families of Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean, the discovery of the canoe brought a renewed sense of both hope and dread. Hope that they might finally learn the truth about what happened to their loved ones, and dread at the possibility that the truth might be far more horrific than they could have ever imagined. The 8 years of silence were finally broken, but the answers they sought were shrouded in a new layer of mystery and uncertainty. Deputy Zoe Marshall, a rising star in the New York State Police known for her sharp intellect and relentless dedication, was assigned to lead the reopened investigation. The discovery of the canoe and its contents had injected a jolt of energy into a case that had long been considered unsolvable. Marshall, determined to bring closure to the families of the missing campers, approached the investigation with a fresh perspective, unburdened by the assumptions and dead ends that had plagued the initial inquiry. Her first priority was to identify Miles McCarthy and determine his connection to the abandoned canoe. A background check revealed that McCarthy had a minor criminal record, mostly petty offenses, but nothing that suggested a propensity for violence. However, further investigation uncovered a more disturbing aspect of McCarthy's life. He was linked to a loosely organized militia group known for its anti-government rhetoric and survivalist ideology. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation from a potential accidental drowning or wilderness mishap to something far more sinister. Marshall learned that the militia, calling themselves the Adirondack Guardians, maintained a hidden encampment deep within the mountains. They operated off the grid, distrustful of authority and fiercely protective of their perceived autonomy. Their activities were shrouded in secrecy, their existence known only to a select few within the local community. Surveillance teams were dispatched to monitor McCarthy and his known associates. Undercover agents infiltrated the fringes of the militia, gathering intelligence on their activities and beliefs. The picture that emerged was one of a paranoid group, convinced that the government was encroaching on their freedoms and preparing for an imminent societal collapse. They saw themselves as protectors of the wilderness, guardians against what they perceived as an encroaching tide of government overreach. Marshall revisited Natalie Stanton's initial statement, the one that had been dismissed years earlier. Stanton's description of the unfamiliar men near the launch point, their unsettling demeanor and nondescript vehicle, now took on a new significance. She worked with a sketch artist to create composite images of the men based on Stanton's recollection. The sketches were then circulated among law enforcement agencies and compared to photographs of known militia members. The result was a near-perfect match to two of McCarthy's closest associates. This connection, though circumstantial, provided a crucial link between the militia and the missing campers. It suggested that the campers may have inadvertently stumbled upon the militia's hidden encampment, or perhaps they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, mistaken for government agents or perceived as a threat to the group's secrecy. As the investigation progressed, the net tightened around Miles McCarthy and his followers. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, painting a grim picture of what might have transpired on that fateful day in the Adirondacks 8 years earlier. The wilderness, once a sanctuary for the four friends, had become a silent witness to a tragedy waiting to be unearthed. The interrogation room was stark and sterile, the air thick with tension. Miles McCarthy sat across from Deputy Zoe Marshall, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He appeared calm, almost detached, his eyes fixed on a point just beyond Marshall's shoulder. He had initially denied any involvement in the disappearance of the four campers, claiming he had never seen them before and had no knowledge of their ill-fated canoe trip. He insisted that the discovery of his wallet in the overturned canoe was a mere coincidence, perhaps planted there to frame him. But Marshall, armed with the mounting evidence against him, the zip ties, the duct tape, Natalie Stanton's eyewitness account, and the growing body of intelligence gathered on the Adirondack Guardians, pressed him relentlessly. She laid out the facts methodically, dismantling his carefully constructed alibi piece by piece. Slowly, under the weight of the evidence and Marshall's unwavering persistence, McCarthy's facade began to crumble. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting around the room. He started to fidget, nervously picking at a loose thread on his shirt. The silence in the room was broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, in a low, almost inaudible voice, McCarthy began to talk. He confessed that his militia group had been operating in the Adirondacks for years, living off the grid, training for what they believed was an inevitable collapse of society. They were deeply suspicious of outsiders, convinced that the government was watching them, waiting for an excuse to shut them down. On the morning the campers set out, McCarthy and several of his followers had been patrolling the area near the launch point. They saw the four friends preparing their canoe, their laughter echoing across the still water. They mistook them for government agents, sent to infiltrate their camp and expose their activities. Driven by paranoia and fear, they followed the campers to their secluded island campsite. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the unsuspecting group, zip-tying their hands and feet. They interrogated the terrified campers, demanding to know their purpose in the wilderness. Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean, confused and frightened, insisted they were just friends on a camping trip. But the militia, blinded by their own delusions, refused to believe them. They accused them of being spies, of plotting to betray them to the authorities. When the campers continued to resist, the situation escalated. A struggle ensued. In the chaos and confusion, one of the militia members panicked and struck Xavier Boone, the blow proving fatal. The campers' desperate pleas for mercy were ignored. In a chilling act of violence fueled by paranoia and fear, the remaining campers were killed. McCarthy described how they weighted the bodies with rocks and placed them in the canoe. They set the vessel adrift, hoping it would disappear into the vastness of the lake, taking their dark secret with it. He spoke in a monotone, his voice devoid of emotion, as if recounting a mundane chore rather than a horrific act of violence. He expressed no remorse, no regret, only a cold, detached acceptance of the consequences of his actions. His confession brought a chilling end to the 8-year mystery, revealing a truth far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The wilderness, once a place of solace and adventure for the four friends, had become their final resting place, a silent testament to the devastating consequences of fear and paranoia. With McCarthy's confession, the investigation shifted from finding the missing campers to building a case against him and his followers. The arrests were swift and decisive. The Adirondack Guardians, once shrouded in secrecy, were exposed to the light of day, their hidden world of extremism and violence brought to an abrupt and ignominious end. Dr. Jeremiah Carlisle, a renowned forensic anthropologist with years of experience in recovering and identifying human remains, arrived in the Adirondacks with a grim task ahead of him. Miles McCarthy's confession had provided a general location for the disposal of the bodies, but the vastness of Lake Lila and the passage of time presented significant challenges. Using sonar technology and underwater remotely operated vehicles, Carlisle and his team began a painstaking search of the lakebed. The work was slow and methodical, each sonar ping echoing through the murky depths, each image from the ROV scrutinized for any sign of the missing campers. After days of searching, a faint anomaly appeared on the sonar display. A cluster of objects resting on the lake floor, partially obscured by sediment and debris. Divers were dispatched to investigate. They descended into the cold, dark water, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Tangled in the decaying remnants of the canoe were the skeletal remains of Madison Reed, Catherine Blair, Xavier Boone, and Sean Harvey. The recovery process was delicate and painstaking. The remains were carefully brought to the surface, each bone meticulously documented and photographed. Back in his lab, Carlisle began the arduous task of identifying the remains and piecing together the final moments of the campers' lives. He examined each bone, noting the fractures and injuries that spoke silently of the violence they had endured. Dental records and DNA analysis confirmed the identities of the four friends, bringing a bittersweet sense of closure to their families. The discovery of the remains had a profound impact on the families, who had waited 8 long years for answers. The news, while confirming their worst fears, also brought a sense of relief, a finality that allowed them to begin the long and difficult process of healing. Sarah Reed, Madison's mother, spoke of the complex emotions she felt upon learning of her daughter's fate. "It's a strange mix of grief and gratitude," she explained. "Grief for the life that was stolen, and gratitude that we finally have answers, that we can finally bring our children home." David Boone, Xavier's father, echoed the sentiment. "We can finally lay them to rest," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We can finally say goodbye." The trial of Miles McCarthy and his followers was a media spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the final chapter in this tragic saga. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing the militia's extremist beliefs, their paranoia, and their chilling act of violence. McCarthy and several of his followers were convicted on multiple counts of murder and conspiracy. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of the 4 missing campers had far-reaching implications, highlighting the dangers of extremist groups operating in the shadows and the importance of wilderness safety. It sparked a national conversation about the rise of anti-government militias and the potential for violence when paranoia and fear take hold. Park rangers and law enforcement agencies across the country reviewed their safety protocols, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and preparedness in remote areas. The tragic story of Madison, Catherine, Xavier, and Sean served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of hope in the face of unimaginable loss. They were 4 friends who loved the outdoors, whose passion for adventure led them to a place of unspeakable tragedy. Their memory lives on, not as victims, but as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the unwavering love of family and friends.